Okay, good day. Today's daf is daf Tzadik Zion. We are at the Gemara, four lines from the bottom of Tzadik Vav Amabet. And at the end of yesterday's daf, we learned the Mishnah on Tzadik Vav Amabet. And specifically, it notes that if you cook a Gid Anasha with the entire thigh, then there is a concept im yesh ba no sein tam, if the thigh has enough content that or insufficient content that the Gita Nasha is able to convey flavor to it, Harezo Surah, then the entire thigh is going to be prohibited. And we say, Ketzan Misharinota, how do we make that measurement? Kivasar Belefet. We take it like it's like meat and turnips. And Rashi explained what does that mean, meat and turnips, Kivasar Belefet. First Rashi on the Mishnah. Rowan Ki'ilu Hayerech Liftot. We treat the thigh as if it is the lefet, as if it is the turnips, and v'hagid basar, and we treat the gid hanasha as if it's meat. And so, as a result, the question v'ilu haya nosein tam basar kishir hagid beliftot hayerech asur, and if the meat amount of if you take an amount of meat, so if it's 3 ounces of giranasha and 10 ounces of thigh. So you take those 3 ounces of meat and 10 ounces of the turnips, and you say, does the 3 ounces of meat impart flavor to the turnips? And if the answer would be yes, then asur, then it is going to be prohibited. We will be sure that the giranasha is going to convey flavor to the rest of the thigh. The shiurin halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that these measurements are given to us from Moshe at Sinai. Ugamiri de bahachi misharinan de afal pisha ilu haya karov or kaflot hayatzarach pachot yoter. Well, and we choose specifically to use a turnip, even though if you were to choose a leek or cabbage, you might need more or less in order to do it. But this is basically what the tradition that we have. And we will see in the Gemara that this is going to get translated into the more commonly known shear of Shishim of 1/60th. But let's take a look now as the Gemara will help us understand this Mishnah in greater detail. So Amar Shmuel, Lo Shanu Elishin is Bashelba. So again, Gemara, fourth line from the bottom of Tzadik Vav Bet. So Shmuel says that we're only that when we taught this law regarding how much of thigh you need and how much of gid anasha you need, it is specifically where you cook it. As Rashi notes, lo shanu de kiyeshbo benosein tam kol yerech asura, that when we say that you look at how much is in the entire thigh to determine whether or not the entire thigh is going to be prohibited, if the gid anasha is able to impart flavor to it, Ella Shenispashal. It's only where we're talking about cooking. Shaharotev ma'alea tam b'kol basar, because the sauce, right? Cooking is by definition where there is some kind of liquid medium that is helping to convey the heat through the entire process. And so maybe it's some kind of sauce or gravy, but the bottom line is there's some kind of liquid that in which this is cooking, and that gravy, sauce, etc., is able to convey the taste of the giranasha throughout the entire thigh. And so that's what we're talking about. And back into the Gemara, second line of the Gemara, third line from the bottom of the daf, and second word on the line. Aval nitzla, if you were to roast it, aval nitzla ba, if you were to roast the thigh with the gid hanasha in it, kolef v'ochel ad shemagia legid. You would be able to peel away layers of meat and continue to eat until you got to the gid, and then you would have to not eat the gid anusha because the gid anusha is not kosher. So and Rashi explains aval nitzla imo aval nitzla imo nitzmas betocho, meaning that you roast it with the giranasha inside it. Ve'eno mivapeya v'yotzi babasar. It doesn't result in the taste permeating through the entire meat. Now Tosos asks a question here. I don't understand. Our Mishnah specifically said, if we look back at the Mishnah, the second word in the Mishnah itself, Yarek is bajel if you cooked it. So why would I ever think that this was actually talking about something besides cooking? And so Tosos gives that explanation. So let's take a look. It's Tosos aval nitzla kola va'ochel ad shemagia v'im tomer mike mashmalan pshita delo matzu lemeimar huadin nitzla. Of course, you can't say that the same rule applies to roasting. Tim kain lamali nuspashol demishas malicha nesar. When it comes to cooking, where we say that from the moment of salting it's going to be prohibited. Dimiliach harehu karoseach, right? And we say that salting, uh, salting is like cooking. I'm sorry. That salting is like do some kind of roasting. We are going to say that salting is like roasting, and so as a result, we see that it has different rules than cooking. Ubelo malicha iefshar libashel de'ain habasar yotze midei damo. That when you salt it, so then you have the ability to cook it right away. But if you don't salt it, well, then you can't cook it at all. You have to actually do it really well. I'm sorry. Uh, the point of this of this line in Tosos is to say that when it comes to cooking, you have to have salted it, but when it comes to roasting, you don't have to have salted it as well. And so the bottom line is we see that there is a very big difference between cooking and roasting. So how would we even think to say that the same rule should apply for roasting as it applies to cooking? So v'yesh lomer, and so as a result, the Tosos adds the Kamash Malan the lo nemar nispashal de masnisan hainu nitzla. That the issue is that sometimes the term cooking can refer to roasting. De ashkachan de kari litzli bishul. Diksiv, as it says in Divrei Yomim Perek Lamed Hey, Vayivashlu Pesach, that they cook the Pesach. But of course, it doesn't mean to actually cook, because you're not supposed to cook the Pesach. You're supposed to roast the Korban Pesach. V'chein haditanan, and we are going to see on Daf Kuf Terem Bet Halev Koro umotzias demo, that when you comes to eating the heart of an animal, you need to tear it in order to get the blood to come out. Lo karo, but if you didn't tear it, karo la'akar bishulo, you can tear it after you cook it. Ubai lemidak mina baresh ketzad solin, and we end up asking in the seventh perek of Psachim de kibolo kakpolto, or that when it absorb the way it absorbs, so that is going to be how it exudes the taste as well. So alma la'achar bishulo de katani hainul achar tzliyaso. And in given that context, it must be that the bishul of the heart that we are talking about in that situation is not actually bishul at all. It's referring to roasting. Because if you were actually doing bishul, well, then you would be catching all of the liquid, and anything that would be extracted based on the principle of kibolo kakpolto, that when the way it's absorbed, that's also how you extract the taste from something, then you would end up putting it right back in it, because the heart is still cooking in the pot with all of these things. The id b'kadeira, if you were cooking in with a pot, hakol asur, everything would be prohibited, because the blood that would be coming out of the taste would then just go straight back in to the heart. im ein pi kanech chutz l'kadera, and that's a reference to that if the windpipe is outside of the pot, well then you can have a situation where when you cook the liver, it's going to be okay because the windpipe can be the mechanism for the blood to sort of drip out and come out of the pot and not get absorbed back into the entire animal. And so the bottom line is that Tosos is highlighting that fact that we can refer to sometimes sli roasting as a bishul. And so therefore, that's why Shmuel needs to tell us that specifically our Mishnah is talking about bishul and it's not talking about tzli. So Gemara asks back into the Gemara, second to last line, third word on the line, Aini, is it really true that in fact roasting does not result in the flavor going through the entire thing? V'ha'amar Rav Huna gedishet salo b'chalavo. If you have a kid, a baby goat that is roasted with the chalev, with the fat of it in it, asur, it is prohibited. Lechol afilu mirosh ozno. You can't even eat the top of the ear. And Rashi points out afilu mirosh ozno she'ein sham chalev. That's a part that has no chalev there. There was never any non-kosher fat at the top of the goat's ear. So alma pashat isura bekulei. So clearly, in this situation, the non-kosher taste of the fat of the non-kosher fat has gone through the entire animal. And so that's why you can't eat it. So if that's true, why wouldn't it go through the entire, why wouldn't the taste of the gitanasha also go through the entire thigh? And so if that's true when you're doing roasting, and so how could Shmuel's statement be accurate? So shiny chalev de mafapeya. No, the chalev is different because it is so fatty that it permeates the entire piece of meat. So, chalev asur. But 1 second, is it really true that if you roast something with chalev, it's going to be prohibited? V'amar Rabba bar bar Chana, uvda hava kamei de Rabbi Yochanan, b'kenishta de Ma'on. There was a situation where Rabbi Yochanan was in the shul in Ma'on, bigdi shitzla'o bechelbo, where again you had a kid that was roasted with the chalev. Va'asu shailua la Rabbi Yochanan. The question came to Rabbi Yochanan. Va'amar, and he said, kolef va'ochel ad shemegil chelbo. Well, essentially, just like Shmuel said with respect to the gitanasha, that was exactly what Rabbi Yochanan said. So that's very consistent with Shmuel, and it's inconsistent with the statement by Rav Huna. So what's going on? No, hahu kakashava. No, that was a particularly lean, or answer number one is that was a particularly lean animal, a lean goat. And so as a result, that's why Rabbi Yochanan was able to say that you did not have to worry about the taste of the chalev permeating the entire animal. Rav Huna bar Yehuda Amar, Rav Huna offers a second answer. Kulya bechel bahavash v'sharya. It was not a gedi shitzla'o bechel bo, but rather it was a kulya, a kidney that was roasted with the chalev. And so that was permitted, as Rashi tells us, kulya b'chal b'hava v'sharya mishum demasik karma. There is a membrane that is around the kidney, and so as a result, although the chalev surrounding the kidney was cooked with the rest of the kidney, the membrane that covers the kidney ensures that only that part that is touching essentially is going to be problematic, and the rest of it is effectively protected. A third possible answer: Rav and Bar Rav Ada Amar. Kilchis be'ilpas haba. It was a kilchis. Now, what is kilchis? Rashi tells us. Take a look at Rashi, fourth line from the top of Rashi on Sadik Zayin Amid Aleph. Sheketz dagim katanim. It was some kind of disgusting or insect-like fish creature. So it's a non-kosher fish, small fish creature. So that is what we're talking about. And so, and ilpas shel basar. It was in a pot, and ilpas is a pot. It was in a pot of meat. And so what happens? V'asu shailul Rabbi Yochanan. And so the question came to Rabbi Yochanan. You have this non-kosher fish that is being cooked in the same pot as kosher meat. So what happens? So v'amr lahu litaimei kfila arma'a. And what he said was not actually that you should peel it and eat it until you reach to the chalev, because of course this answer doesn't even involve chalev. It's a really different situation. He said that you should have somebody who's from Aram taste it, and who's a chef from Aram, he should taste it. And that way you'll know, as Rashi tells us, litamei kfela. So nachtum, a baker, Ovid Kochavim, who's not Jewish, but Ashmeinan, and so we see demuter lismoch alav. We can rely on somebody who's not Jewish, lefi tumo, by having him explain the situation, by having him say it without knowledge, meaning we don't tell him that you're going to paskin based on what he says, but ask him the question without giving him the greater context. And so that way he's not going to have any incentive to lie to you. And so as a result, you can rely on what answer he gives. V'lo yediyuhu shetzrichen lo ledavar veheter, and he don't, so he doesn't know that you're relying on him for determining whether or not this is going to be kosher or not. V'amar lahu. Okay, so that is the third possible answer. The third case is that it actually had nothing to do with the kid roasting with its chalev. So Amar Rava. So now we're going to have the core set of rules that are regarding when we will say that something is considered to be nullified in a mixture. So Amar Rava may reish hava kakashyali. Based on this statement of Rabbi Yochanan, right, that you should have somebody not Jewish taste it. Now that's going to explain something for Rava. So Meiresh Havaka Kashali Hadatanya. I used to have a question about the following brisa. Kedera Shabishel Ba Basar Lo Yivashel Ba Chalav. That when you have a pot that you use to cook meat in it, you shouldn't cook milk in it. The im bishel, but if you did cook something with milk in it, beno Saint Tam. Well, then if the meat that's absorbed in the pot can give flavor into the milk because of the relatively small amount of milk that's there, well, then it's going to be not kosher. And if, on the other hand, the milk is sufficiently large that you can outweigh the contents of the pot, well, then you're going to be okay. Truma, when it comes to truma, lo yivashel bachulin. When it comes to a pot that you cook truma in, you can't also then cook chulin in it, because again, the truma that you cooked in it will impart flavor into the chulin, and now that chulin will be not edible to a kohen, to a non-kohen. V'im bishel beno Saint Tam. But if you did cook chulin in it, well, then you have to see what the whether or not it imparted any taste. So bishlam truma. So that's the brisa. So bishlam truma. So now this is again Rava speaking. I understand when it came to truma. How do I determine whether or not the food imparted any taste? Time la kohen. A kohen can taste the food, and that way we'll know whether or not the chulin is now tastes like truma, because the kohen can the kohen is allowed to eat both the chulin and the truma, and so there's no problem with the kohen eating it, and so he can tell you does it taste in fact like something that's kosher. Ela basar b'chalav, but when you have meat mixed with milk, man timely, who's allowed to taste it? There isn't anybody who's allowed to taste it. But Hasha, the Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Samchinan Akfela Arma Hachinami samchinan akvela arma. But now that we have the statement where Rabbi Yochanan gave as the explanation, as the answer to the question of how do you deal with the fish that was cooking in a pot of meat, and whether the non-kosher fish, and how do I determine whether or not the non-kosher fish imparted any taste to the meat. And he said that you can get a non-Jewish chef to taste it. So too here, when it comes to cooking meat and milk together, if you have something and some meat, some milk is now cooked in a meat pot, you have a chef taste it, and that way he can tell you whether or not any of the taste imparted. So now we get to the part where it says, and again, the Masoros Hashas here is changes it from di Amarava to Amarava because it's really a new idea. And now we're going to get Amarava. Rava is going to tell us the general rules with respect to having mixtures and whether or not you can eat the resulting mixture that includes something that's not kosher. So Amarabanan b'taima v'amarabanan b'kfela. And as we turn to Tzadik Zayin Amabet, we now say v'amarabanan b'shishim. So there are three kinds of situations where we'll look to different sources. Sometimes we can taste things ourselves. And the example is the as we had the Kohen tasting whether or not the taste of truma is in something that is chulin, that is not truma. And sometimes the rabbis say that we need to do a kafela, have a chef do the tasting, and sometimes the rabbis say that we need shishim, that we need to have 60 of kosher taste, of kosher volume to 1 of the non-kosher volume. So hilkach min b'she'eno mino de'etera. If you have two things that are different in kind, and it's all permitted, so then b'taima, that's something that could be tasted, as we see the top Rashi on Tzadik Zayin Amabet. B'taima yitimenu kohen. You can have a kohen taste im ein truma notenet tam b'chulin, whether or not the truma has given taste to the chulin in the pot. So yochel atavshel aflazarim, and if it has not, then the non-kohanim can also eat from that pot. De'isura, and then if you're talking about something that's prohibited, and Rashi gives kagon basar b'chalav, like milk and meat and milk that have been cooked together. She'ein bein bris. Rashi, next Rashi. She'ein bein bris yachol l'ta'amo samchina kafela. Well, in that situation, then we rely on a chef. So that's back into the Gemara, but kafela. And so second line of the Gemara, end of the line, umin bimino, and when two things are identical in kind, one of which is going to be kosher and one of which is not, well then there's no point in anybody tasting because everything tastes alike. Deleka lameka mataima, you can't rely on taste. Inami min b'she'eno mina de isura, or if you have two different kinds and it's prohibited, vileka kafela, and there isn't a chef available, in both of those situations, b'shishim, that is where you can rely on, is there 60 times the 60 times the volume of the problematic substance in the pot. If there is 60 times, so then the taste of the problematic taste will not go through and will not and will be effectively diluted and eliminated. And if there's less than 60 times, so then we have to be concerned that the taste is throughout the material. So now the Gemara tells us a story. Hanu atmasa de'imlichu be'reish galusa begida denasha. So there was a salted thighs in the house of Reish Galusa that included the Gida Nasha as part of them. Ravina Asar, Rav Acha bar Rav Shari, Rav Acha, the son of Rav, he said, no, it's permitted. So Asu Shailua Lamar bar Ravashi. It came to Mar bar Ravashi, and he said, Amar Lahu Abba Shari. My father permitted it. Rav Ashi permitted it. So Amr Le Rav Acha bar Rav Ravina. So my daitech. So Rav Acha asked Ravina, I don't understand how you could prohibit it. De Amar Shmuel, after all, it was Shmuel who says, Maliyach harehu karoseach. When it comes to salting, that is like boiling. Kavush harehu kamavushal. It's like something hot. And kavush, if it's pickled, then that is like it's cooked. So v'hamar Shmuel, and so here we have on the one hand Maliach hu harehu karoseach, differentiating something that if it's salted, it's considered like it's hot, but not cooked. So, and Shmuel's the one who says lo shanu el nishpashel, that when we talked in our Mishnah, it required the thigh that was cooked in the Gid Anasha to determine whether or not the Gid Anasha's taste went through the entire thigh. Aval nitzlaba, but if it was only roasted, so you only have to worry about the Gid Anasha. You can peel and eat what is over it and not have to worry about it as long as you don't actually take the item itself. And so how can you have said with respect to salting, which is like roasting, and now you're telling me that it somehow permeated the prohibition permeated the entire item. V'chitema my keroseach de ka'amar keroseach de mevushal. And if you say, oh, well, roseach doesn't mean roasting, it means cooking. It means, heated through cooking. V'had de ka'amar kavush harehu k'mevushal miklal de roseach de tzali l'kamar. But the fact that we say that pickling is like cooking, and we don't use the word roseach, that implies that roseach implies something less than cooking, and namely roasting. And in fact, kasha, this is in fact difficult for Ravina and supports Rav Acha bar Rav, and the decision that was offered by Rav Ashi as well on the question of the salted thighs that included the Gid Anasha in them. So Amar Rabbi Chanina, Keshahain Misharin, Misharin Barotev, the Kefa Uchatichos Ukadera. That when you do the measuring, let's take a look at Rashi, and we'll do a couple of Rashis here. Keshahain Misharin, it's 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, about 17, 18 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Tzadik Zion Amabet. Keshahain Misharin, Ha-Isser B'Shishim, when you're measuring whether the Isser is there with the 60 that corresponds to it, Umisharinan Oto Shehebo Echad Mishishim Birotev Kefa Ubechatichos Ubekadera. So when you do that measuring to see whether or not there are 60 times the problematic substance, so you include the soup, the sauce, the kefa, which we'll see in a moment, kefa punderilla dak, it's the small pieces, shalbasar of meat, vitavlin and spices, hamisase b'shulei kadera, that sink to the bottom of the kadera, that translated here as sediment. So, and then you have the pieces of substance itself that's in the soup, uba kadera, and the pot itself. Now, what exactly do we mean by that? So, some say, well, look at the amount of pot itself. You take the volume of the walls of the pot and incorporate that in the measurement of whether or not there's 60 times, because the pot itself is going to absorb some of the taste and thereby lessen the possible absorption by the rest of what's in the pot. And so you have to account for that, and therefore it counts towards it. So and no, you don't measure based on the volume itself of the pot, but you look at how much got absorbed into the pot. there is a sense in this that of understanding that what essentially burns off of a pot of soup is somehow absorbed into the walls of that pot. And so if you started with 20 ounces and now after boiling it all together, you have 18 ounces. So two of those ounces went into the walls of the pot. And so that is the explanation. So again, so we have these two different viewpoints as to how we measure the 60. But the bottom line is what's important here is that we measure it against all of the contents of the pot for sure. So Rabbi Abahu, Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Isurin Shebetorah Misharinan Ki'ilu Hein Batzal V'Kaflot. That when it comes to all prohibitions in the Torah, and Rashi notes, take a look at Rashi now from the bottom of the narrow lines of Rashi. It's six, it's like 3, 6, not, about 11 lines up. Levad Megid Anasha de Kibasar Belefesu. Right when we saw in the Mishnah that when you evaluated whether the Gid Anasha it was sufficiently large relative to the thigh as to create a problem. You looked at it as if it was meat. The Gid Anasha was the meat, and the thigh, the rest of the meat of the thigh, was considered like a turnip, and to see whether it would the meat would give taste to that turnip. But when it comes to more general situations, to other kinds of prohibitions, we measure the item that is prohibited as if it was the onion or a leek, which are obviously going to convey taste even more so than meat. And so Rashi continues, Misharinan otam ki'ilu ha'isr batzal o kaflot, that we treat the prohibited substance as if it was an onion or a leek. V'ilu hayanosin tam beheter zeh, and if in fact it would give taste to this permitted substance, whatever it is that's in the shinis bashal imo, that is cooked with what is prohibited, osro. Well, then the whole thing would be prohibited. Ubahach isure delo matzi limit aminhu. And we're talking about a situation where you cannot taste the mixture, kamar. Kigon min umino, for example, if you have two things of the same taste. V'inami she'eno mino de isura v'leika kafela. Or when you have two things that taste differently, but there isn't somebody who's not Jewish and a chef to taste it. And this is before we had the rule about shishim. Now we have a general rule that essentially the measure of this relationship between the onions or leek and the permitted substance is that as long as the permitted substance is more 60 or more times the prohibited substance, then you're going to be okay. Amrale Rabbi Abba, back into the Gemara. We are now one from the top, from the bottom of the Gemara. It's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 19, 20 lines up, beginning of the line. Amrle Rabbi Abba Abaye, Lisharino befilpilin. So why not measure? Why are you using onions and leek? Use peppers, the tavlin, and spices. Dafil be'elef lo batlan. And as a result, you would say that even if there was 1,000 times more kosher than non-kosher, you would still say that it's going to be not nullified, because one pepper corn can spice an entire dish. And so as a result, maybe we should use that measurement for determining it. As Rashi tells us, pilpulin nosnin tam be'elav kamosan. It can give taste, a peppercorn can give taste to something that is 1,000 times its size. So Amrle, Abaye explains, Shiaru chachamim de'ein nosin tam be'isurin yoser mi batzal v'kaflot. No, the rabbis are determined that in fact nothing that is not kosher gives taste in a more strong manner than onions and leek. And so as a result, that's why you're okay as long as it's going to the ratio is such that an onion or leek that is the measure of the non-kosher substance would not impart taste to the volume that you have of the kosher substance. So Amar of Nachman gid b'shishim, that the ain gid min minyan, that when now going back to the fact that we have the measurement of 60 to 1. So how does that work? So when you have a gid hanasha, it is the relevant measurement is 60 to 1, and the ain gid min minyan, the gid does not count, meaning that you have to measure the volume of the gid and the volume of everything else, and the everything else has to be equal to 60 in order to times the size of the gid anasha. Kechal kishish bishishim. When you look at an udder, which of course is problematic because the udder itself contains milk, and so cooking the udder is problematic because you've now got and the udder itself is considered meat, and so it's effectively cooking meat with milk. So there, the udder is again, you need 60 times the size of the udder in order to nullify the milk within the udder. Ukachel min minyan, but the udder itself counts towards it because the udder itself is also meat. And so as a result, effectively, the udder counts twice for the measurement, once as the milk and then once as towards the meat. Beitza, if you have an egg, and Rashi tells us this is not a kosher egg, b'shishim, and you mixed it and it's cooked with other eggs, then the question is do you need it? You need to have 60 of the kosher eggs times the size of the non-kosher egg. The aim beitza min minyan, and the non-kosher egg that's mixed up with it doesn't get counted towards the kosher eggs. So again, the bottom line is that when you try to determine what the volume is that you need relative to the non-kosher item that is creating a problem, there's one exception, that basically when it comes to the udder of a cow, that will count both as towards the as part of the kosher group and as part of the non-kosher group. But everything else, it's generally not kosher itself, and so as a result, it will only count towards the non-kosher total and not also count towards the kosher total. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Breder of Mesharshia, kachal ukachal atzmo asur. And you should know that if you have, for example, 60 times the volume of an udder in a pot, so as a result, the milk that's in the udder does not, in fact, create a problem for the rest of the meat that is in that pot, the udder itself is going to be prohibited. As Rashi says, third line in the wide lines at bottom, ukakol atzmo asur, sharei habasar nasan bo tam, because the rest of the meat in the dish does impart flavor into the kachal, into the udder. V'hu lo nasan tam b'basar. But the udder itself will not give taste to the rest of the meat. Shiflifi shemuataya, because it's such a minor part of it. It's it's less than 1/60th. And so as a result, we don't have to worry about the meat, but the udder itself, which has now absorbed both meat and milk, is going to be problematic. The inafalakadera acheres oser. And if it falls into another pot, that is going to create a prohibition for that other pot, because now you have essentially something that is meat with milk put into the other pot. So Amar Rav Ashi, Ki Avinan Bei Rav Kahana. When we were in the yeshiva of Rav Kahana, we asked, Ki Misharinan B'didei Misharinan. So B'mai Denafik Minei Misharinan. So 1 second. When it falls into the new pot, do we measure it against the entire thing, the entire udder, as Rashi says, shishim kamoso, that we need 60 times the entire udder of in the new pot. Or do we measure just Rashi says, Ein trishkan shiyahe beheter ela b'shishim masha palat zeh. You only need to worry about 60 times what the udder itself absorbed. Dahai mai da'asi kaman lav b'kederahu umishta shadina le'lubar. So that this that you don't have to worry about that essentially we can just measure against the milk that left the udder and sort of what was in the rest of the and it is now in the rest of the udder, because you did not bring all of that from the original pot into the second pot. And of course, some of the milk got absorbed in the original pot. And so maybe we should measure a smaller amount. So Pshita b'didei misharinan. With the Gemara concludes, no, it's clear that you're going to measure the entire udder to iba medinafak mine, because if we only measure what's left in the udder minaya dinan. How do I know how much? Elamiata nafal lekadera acheres lo ye'esor. But one second, if we need against the oh, my apologies. So the question, my apologies. I misread this. Let's back up just a second. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, so Amar Rav Ashi. Let's go back to the Amar Rav Ashi question. So the question is about the original pot. The original pot that the udder is cooking in. So kiavina be'rab ibailon mikimish arina. When we measure it again, when we measure the udder against the rest of the meat, b'didei misharina, are we measuring the entire udder, or b'mai denafak minei misharina, or do we measure the amount of milk that was left in the udder? And so then we ask the question, pshita de b'dei misharina, and we answer, no, we have to use the amount of the entire udder, because if you're going to say what is left in the udder in terms of what milk, minayadin, and how do we know how much milk is left? We don't know the answer to that question because we never attempted to measure the amount of milk that's left. But one second, so then in that situation, maybe we should not be worried about when the udder falls into the second pot, because maybe we should not say that the entire second pot also needs to have 60 times. And so the Gemara answers, Kavan to Amar of Yitzchak, Breder of Masharshia, Ukachalatzmo Asur. Since Rav Yitzchak says that the udder itself is prohibited, Shavya Rabbanan Kechaticha de Nevela. It's treated as if it's now all a piece of Nevela, and therefore it doesn't make a difference how much milk was in it, how much meat was in this udder. The whole thing is considered prohibited, and so as a result, in order to not have the udder impart taste to the rest of the second pot, you would need to have 60 times the size of the udder, even though there was 60 times the size of the udder in the first pot. And so as a result, you might have thought, well, okay, so fine, let the udder be not kosher, but maybe it shouldn't be so not kosher as to require 60 times its size. No, we say that once it's considered prohibited as if it was meat cooked with milk, so then it's going to still be problematic, and it's going to be treated like a piece of nevela that fell into the second pot, and therefore you also need 60 times the volume in the second pot. So with that, we'll finish for today, and we're at the two dots near the bottom of Tzadik Zayin Mabet. I will circulate the daf taught by Rabbi Linzer for Daf Tzadik Chet and Tzadik Tet. And I'm looking forward to being back in person with all of you, God willing, next Wednesday. Have a wonderful day.